In this lecture, I'll cover structural and strategic approaches for working with couples presenting with infidelity. Unfortunately for you guys, I am recording this lecture in my office, so there is no chance that Nelson will make a guest appearance. Stay tuned to future lectures for appearances by Nelson. Once I cover the structural and strategic models and how you would use them to assess and conceptualize and treat couples with infidelity, you will then do a case study activity on your own, which can be found on Blackboard. So like with any problem that a couple presents with or that a client presents with when we're using structural and strategic models, we're going to be thinking a lot about adaptability and boundaries. And remember that boundaries also refers to communication. So you want to be assessing overall how adaptable is this couple. And so in order to assess that, you're going to want to ask about their adaptability prior to the affair. How have they adapted to problems in the past? How have they solved problems? Obviously, when a couple is coming in with an affair, it is the pressing issue for them, and they may very well be in distress. So one of the things you're going to have to do is assess what the relationship was like before the affair, because you're going to have to sort of understand and pull together their pattern of interactions and how they get stuck. That's going to include the affair, but it needs to predate the affair as well, so that you and the clients have a context and an understanding for how this affair was able to occur in this relationship, or what function the affair served in the relationship. So you will want to assess relationship satisfaction and their commitment to the relationship, both before the affair and currently. You will likely expect that their satisfaction currently will be lower. And their commitment, honestly, it really depends on each person. One or both partners may be very committed to working on it, or one or both partners might be ambivalent. And I'll talk a little bit about ambivalence later. You also want to see how the couple discusses the affair. And this is, again, like with any presenting problem. How do they talk about the problem? Because this is going to give you an indication of how they typically handle conflict, but you're also going to want to ask, right? You're going to see the process in the room, and you're going to want to ask, is this how you typically discuss problems, or is this how you typically handle conflict? Are they avoiding it? Are they avoiding the topic, which may seem strange because they're coming to therapy for it, but you may see people kind of trying to brush it under the rug or not get into kind of the details or the nitty-gritty of their feelings because they are trying to avoid conflict. Or is it a constant, symmetrical, escalating battle, or is it somewhere in between? There could be a complementary pattern as well, a pursue, withdraw, or accuse, deny type of pattern going on. You also want to assess their boundaries around the couple. How are they interacting with external systems? So, one, who knows about the affair, and how are they going to make decisions moving forward about who to tell, particularly thinking about extended family, in-laws, close friends, and children, if there are any. You'll want to help the couple's going to need to think about how talking about the affair with others can be a resource and a challenge to them. For example, each partner is likely going to need support from somebody other than their partner and from somebody other than you. So who can they trust to provide that support that isn't going to perhaps hold a grudge against the participating partner, the offending partner, or who isn't going to make things worse? And also, what do the boundaries look like with the person who was outside of the relationship and had an affair, the extra-dyadic partner? Is there still communication? Is there still contact? Why? And there may be reasons why contact still has to happen. This could be an ex with whom a partner shares children. This could be somebody one of them works with. So cutting off that affair partner may not be possible. And so you'll have to work with the couple to figure out what boundaries are going to make each of them feel safe. So some of the things you're going to want to ask about are the boundaries or the assumed boundaries that were violated by the affair. Many couples do not talk explicitly about the boundaries of their relationship. They largely assume what is okay and what isn't okay. So one of the things you'll want to explore is what was assumed and what was discussed. How is their relationship agreement decided on? Most often it's going to be assumed. And that's okay, that's normal, but it's good to point it out so that the couple can now discuss it and make firm decisions about what is okay and what is not okay. What kind of affair was it? Was it sexual, emotional, both? Was this a one-time occurrence or was this a long-term affair? And are they still in contact, which I mentioned before. And the nature of the affair just gives you context for what has happened and context to understand how the affair came to be and how the couple is now going to respond to and handle the affair. For example, a long-term emotional and sexual affair may be more distressing to the couple than a one-time sexual affair. You also want to talk about what the relationship looked like and what was going on in their life before the affair started. And this is that question, why this problem now? You're trying to look for maybe some sort of a function that this affair might have served for the system, for the whole system. You want to ask about their cultural background, maybe any faith communities that they belong to ask about sort of what are some of their values and messages and beliefs about affairs, right? How are affairs understood and treated? How would their family deal with this? How is the offended partner supposed to respond, right? For some of us, we may have been taught that an affair is an egregious betrayal, and the person who was cheated on should be devastated, right? And potentially end the relationship. Some might say that you absolutely have to end the relationship. In other cultural contexts, and I'm thinking about a lot of European countries, affairs are understood to happen. It's understood that they happen and that it is not a moral failing of any one partner, and that the person who was not having the affair often can make the choice to ignore it or have their own affair, but it's not necessarily something that leads to a feeling of betrayal or shame. It's more something that is kind of normed, but still is supposed to be kept a secret. So the offense might really be getting caught, not actually having the affair. But that's just a particular example of why you need to assess for their meaning around affairs and not impose your own meaning on it. Assessing for physical or sexual risks. So was protection used when having sex with the affair partner? Is there a risk of harm from either partner or the affair partner? If somebody made threats, might somebody get upset enough to hurt somebody else? Your goal, of course, because you're coming from a structural, strategic model, is to strengthen the adaptability and the communication of the couple. And of course, you're going to do this by interrupting some of the patterns that they might be stuck in. And the goal is not necessarily to maintain the relationship unless both partners agree. But it's important not to assume that both partners want to stay together. One or both may be very ambivalent about the relationship and distressed about this ambivalence. And you can normalize this by saying it may be too soon to make a decision about the relationship, but that the process of therapy might help them learn more about themselves and the relationship so that they can make a more informed decision. So as the therapist, your role is going to be establishing safety and trust with each partner, which may be more challenging in a situation where we typically think of it as having a perpetrator and a victim. But your role is really going to have to be to empathize and connect with each of them and understand how they've each played a role in this affair and how they each can play a role in recovering from the affair. And one thing that the therapist sometimes does is fosters hope. Now, I'm not saying that you make promises to the couple, but that you have an approach and an outlook on their relationship that there is hope to recover from something that may at the time be extremely painful. And you also will need to affirm that both partners do need to be fair in this process and treat one another with fairness if they are to recover. Interventions and techniques. So the mechanism of change here, because we're using structural and strategic, is going to be the production of new relational experiences for the clients and interruption of their problem solution loop. Now, we want to interrupt some of the problem solution loops that they're in and create ones that allow them more room for adaptability, that are more helpful and functional for them. However, because they may be in sort of a crisis state with the affair, you may help them create temporary patterns, not long-term patterns, but temporary patterns that manage that crisis. For example, the couple might agree on temporary rules such as allowing one partner to go through the other partner's phone, the participating partner not going on trips alone for a certain time period, or things like that. That one partner can ask for reassurance or ask certain questions for a time being. These things that reassure and build trust, but may not be sustainable or healthy in the long run. But these can be things that they agree on for a time period. And I think agreeing on it for a restricted time period is important, because I think for both the participating partner and the injured partner, agreeing to something like one gets to go through the other's phone forever certainly does not set up a lot of hope for them and is not really sustainable. And as always, we reframe. What is the pattern that you see the couple stuck in? How were they getting stuck before the affair, and how are they stuck now after the affair? This should be your conceptualization of what led up to the affair, and the summary of kind of how they're each getting stuck and what problems they're facing should be supported by what the couple has said, and each partner should agree that these are problems. Remember, your reframe is only going to work if you incorporate how the clients view the problems and you incorporate the client's language. And then you present the frame that these problems need to be addressed in order for them to move on and recover from the affair. And so this really is a reframe, because our cultural scripts typically tell us very narrow messages about how to move on from an affair, right? And one is that it's all about trust, which of course in a sense it is about trust, but for us we're really thinking about communication and boundaries. And that also that moving on from an affair is perhaps extremely difficult or impossible. And we're not going to frame it that way for them, because it's about interrupting the pattern that they're in, and we see that as possible. So even the reframe alone helps build hope for the couple. So what kind of interventions and techniques do we do? Enactments, right? Because we're trying to create new relational experiences. So we're just seeing how they're discussing the affair, and then perhaps asking questions to disrupt that communication pattern, to introduce a new way of communicating. So if one or both of them are avoiding discussing the affair, we might do some unbalancing. And believe it or not, even coming to therapy after an affair, sometimes partners will avoid arguing about it. One partner might avoid expressing their anger and being direct with the offending partner. This pattern of conflict avoidance has to be interrupted in order to promote clear and direct communication. I'm not saying you want to provoke a screaming match, but you do need to facilitate more honest communication to interrupt that pattern. And of course, there could also be high amounts of blame, anger, defensiveness, shame, and you'll want to soften the partners to interrupt those patterns. Therapeutic restraint, I think, is really important because for many couples, this will be a painful process, and you'll want to emphasize that it's going to take time to heal, and that they should expect for it to take time. Encourage them to take their time, and you should also take your time. Because remember, affairs, like many problems, are not understood by larger society as a systemic issue. They're often understood as the moral failing of one or both partners. And that's not how we're going to see it, but to move them from that linear frame to our systemic frame so that they can do the work needs to be done with care, because they are in a lot of pain, and we have to respect that pain and move at their pace. What would performing the problem look like? Well, certainly we would not have the offending partner perform the problem with the affair, right? But if you have identified a problem solution loop that they're stuck in, you may ask the commission partner to perform more of that problem. So, for example, if, let's say, you do have, let's say the injured or offended partner is kind of obsessed with going through their partner's phone and maybe is doing it constantly, and that's, while this may be part of some agreement that they agreed to build trust, is perhaps getting in the way and preventing other kinds of communication directly between the partners, and it's becoming a problem. What you might do is have that partner go through the other person's phone at a particular time, right? So at 6 o'clock every evening, you'll spend 1 hour going through your partner's phone. Now, I can't imagine you can fill an hour going through somebody's phone, particularly if you do it every single day. You're going to run out of new information. And so that can interrupt that pattern as well. Or, if one partner is constantly checking in on the offending partner, and that's also interrupting their process and getting them stuck, you may assign them to check in at certain intervals throughout the day, perhaps to the point where it's so frequent that it's going to be burdensome to do it, and so they won't do it. And then they'll recognize that they didn't do it, and then that can break the problem. So you might say, okay, on the hour, every hour, I want you to text your partner and ask them to check in, ask where they are. And chances are they are going to skip hours. They're going to miss hours. And then that is something different that you can emphasize. Similarly, if you're finding a complementary pattern, so a pursue, withdraw cycle, an accuse, deny is going to be common here. We always interrupt those complementary patterns by asking the commission partner to do less, right? So instead of asking them to perform that commission behavior, we might instead ask them to do something different, right? So instead of every time you want to text your partner and ask them where they are, do something else, like pick a behavior that makes sense for that person. If you think about the strategic chapter with Harold and Maria, meditation could be a good thing to do instead, if that's something that partner already does and finds helpful. That could have numerous benefits. So again, you're just taking your structural and strategic concepts, conceptualizing the affair as a problem within that theory, and then using the interventions to interrupt the pattern that they're stuck in, to increase their adaptability, the range of behaviors that they have to respond to such a problem, and to improve their communication and their boundaries. And so what we're going to do is a case study. We'll have an opportunity to apply the structural strategic models to a couple that has experienced an affair.